Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Barkology.
Hello.
We've got an amazing guest this week. I'm super excited to talk to her. We've got Jo-Rosie Haffington on. Now, Jo-Rosie she's got a wealth of experience, but she's now kind of calls herself the trainer of dog trainers. So Jo-Rosie, do you want to just tell us a little bit about how your journey working with dogs began and what is your mission now with dogs and trainers and everything?
Absolutely, it's really a pleasure to be here. So thank you for having me. First off, I just want to say this behind me isn't a cushion. It's that
It's a visual
dog.
question.
Who's decided she's going to subscribe to that very stereotypical notion of being a Velcro dog and literally wrap her whole body around me. So if I fall off the chair at some point, it's why.
That's fine.
So I started out. Well, I started working with dogs. I always had dogs growing up, always. Like we always had dogs in the house, like we always had our own dogs. I remember my mum allowing me to actually have my own dog at about 11, walking me down to the rescue centre and me choosing Toby, who was a setter cross Springer Spaniel, when I was 11. And then doing agility when I was at school. And I was always around dogs, always. And then I went to university and mum gave me some really good advice, which was, if you keep getting experience or qualification in the things that you're really passionate about, then you'll find the right job. And Steve Jobs actually said this thing about, like, you've never joined the dots looking forwards, you can only ever join them looking backwards. And when I reel off in a minute my experiences that I've had and got, it will look as though it was really well planned, but I just want to make the point to say it really wasn't. Like, I've been winging it my entire life. So I went to university and at college, I'd got an A and really enjoyed psychology. So I thought, right, I like that. It's enjoyable. I like learning about people. So I went and did a degree in applied psychology. And while I was there, I kind of noticed very quickly that if I was to write essays about animals, I got better grades because I knew a lot about animals, because I'd always been passionate about animals, whereas everybody else didn't really know about it. So I kind of started applying all of the concepts that I was learning in my lectures to animals and kind of specialised a bit in zoology, and then ended up like doing my dissertation on attachment theory in young mammals, and doing everything was applying it to animals. So it made sense then when I got out. Well, when I first got out of university, I went and did an NCTJ in journalism, actually. I did a fast track NCTJ in journalism because I really enjoyed writing and I really enjoyed presenting. Again, it looks like I knew exactly what I wanted to do, but I didn't. So I did that. And then there was a job going at the Blue Cross, which was about writing like all the leaflets and all the gumps about for people who've taken a dog home, and writing all like that type of stuff. And so I took that job. And then whilst I was there, I was asked to do a project, and I ended up kind of steering that project in a certain direction. It was called Respectable, and it was all about respecting bull breeds and like kind of that type of thing. And that took me into the behaviour unit. So I walked into that behaviour. I remember the day it happened. I walked into the behaviour unit down in Burford at the Blue Cross, and Ryan Neal and Claire Stallard was there. And I walked in, and I remember my whole being lighting up like a Christmas tree, and me being like, oh, why didn't anyone tell me that this existed?
Yeah.
Like everything in my being was like, this is me, this is a bit of me, this is where I belong. And then I was lucky enough that whilst I was at the Blue Cross, I did a postgrad in animal behaviour, and like really it started out with me just basically lying to my then boss about what meetings I had so that I could spend all my time in Burford with Claire and Ryan. And then I was lucky enough for them to really mentor me and push me through and do that. So then I worked at the Blue Cross for a long time, and then I left the Blue Cross to work at the Company of Animals because I decided that I wanted to become an expert witness. So I got really involved, and I'd got myself a registered pit bull. I got really involved in kind of that type of thing, working with a lot of the bully breeds. And I suppose that where I started was with the bully breeds, and then at the time it was this very particular time whereby you'd walk through a kennels in England and all of them would just be staffy. And it isn't so much like that now, but it really was back then. And so I was bang into the bull breeds, bang into like that type section 1 type dogs. And a lot of the kind of bitey stuff, even back then, I did dog athletics with him, and a lot of I got really into kind of how can I scratch his biological itch, even though he's been bred to fight other dogs. How can I mimic his combat? And then I went to Company of Animals and learned how to become an expert witness, and got approved by the CPS as an expert witness. And then when I left there, I started out on my own, and created a company called School for Dogs, employed a bunch of staff, ran a behaviour centre and training centre across Sussex. And then what happened was, actually, what originally happened was a cat behaviourist called Sarah, who was a friend of mine, she messaged me and she said to me, look, I'm pregnant and I'm meant to be doing this show for Sky One and I can't do it. You're the only other person I know who does cats as well as dogs. I think you'd probably do really good at it. Can I put you forward? And I was like, yeah, that sounds like I get to go in a nice hotel for a couple of days. Wicked. So went and did that. And then when I was presenting that was all about, like, it was about the differences between cats and dogs. And it was about, I had to teach a cat owner to do 3 tricks and a dog owner to do the same 3 tricks. And then I had to come back and I had to like help them teach their animals the tricks. And then I had to come back and kind of judge who's better.
Okay, cool.
And I was doing it and I really enjoyed doing it, really enjoyed presenting it. And then the executive producer of that show was like, look, I can't believe this is your first time at doing this. You're really, really good. Can I put you forward for this show? It's a bit late because we've already kind of got the final people for it, but can I put you forward for it? It's called Rescue Dog Super. So I said yes. Literally within 2 days, there was a camera crew at my house and they filmed like a sizzle reel, which is like a short bit of film to see what you're like on camera. And then about 2 weeks later, I got the call and they were like, yeah, you've got it. So then that was a series for Channel 4 and that took me away from School for Dogs for about 6 months. And so my then business partner and I kind of agreed that I'd sell her the business and she could take the business because I just couldn't carry on doing it. And then at about the same time, just before I did Rescue Dog Super Dog, I started running courses for dog trainers on these very particular protocols for handling dogs. And I ran a lot of them at Battersea Cats and Dogs Home. And so I'd pair up a trainer with a rescue dog and then we'd do the course. And then I got a couple of calls from different universities and they said, look, can you come and lecture and do like a lecture on whatever, on dog stuff and bring a dog and actually have a dog in the hall and stuff like that. So started doing that a little bit and really enjoyed that. And then one of the organisations that certifies dog trainers came forward and said, can you come and work for us? So I worked for them for 2 years, I think, and developed a behaviour programme. So they had like a training programme, but they didn't have a behaviour programme at the time. So I started to develop a behaviour programme for them. And then at some point, me and Nando, we were together back then. And we kind of said, like, why are we doing this for all these other people? We've got a lot of thoughts about how we wanted to do it. And so then we decided we were going to make the School of Canine Science. And initially that was all about training dog trainers in person. So we actually travelled across America, across Europe, New Zealand, all over the world really, and did lots of in-person seminars teaching dog trainers how to be better dog trainers. And then one day we had this idea and we were like, oh, you know, the one thing that people really get muddled up on is learning theory. And I've always had a bit of a disdain for learning theory. I don't like it. I hate it. I think it's like a drop in the ocean. It's like nothing. It shouldn't be. So we shouldn't be so obsessed with it. So we were like, why don't we make an online course that just does that, so that we don't have to teach that in person, but so that we can spread it further. And at the time, actually, weirdly, it was before Absolute Dogs came about. And so it was before there was really much online stuff at all. Yeah. But as soon as we started writing the course, typically I was like, well, hold on, if they're going to know that, they're going to need to know this, and they're going to need to know this. And then in the end, we wrote a whole like year-long course called Puppy Lab. And then at the same time, we were presenting an ITV show called Teach Your Pet to Do That. And we needed some behind-the-scenes trainers. And we'd met Dean at a dog show, and he was working his dog Sydney at a dog show. And so we kind of talent spotted him and thought like he looks really good and brought him in under us with the ITV show to do the behind the scenes stuff. And then Nando and him got on super, super well. And he came from like a real business background, had a lot of skills that we didn't have. And so we ended up inviting him in, and the three of us worked on School of Care and Science for the last 7 years, developing different courses, including like a 3-year behaviour programme. And then me and Andy split up, and as anybody who's ever had a business with their ex knows, you cannot continue that, cannot do it. It's just not possible. And I left the country that we were living in together because we were both living in Spain. So sold the house, sold the business, came here, and I've been here now for about 6 months, back in England for about 6 months. And I'm about to launch, while I've been here, I've been doing workshops about motivation, about how to motivate your dog properly. But I'm about to properly launch the JRH Academy, which will be an academy for dog trainers, really working, pushing, getting dog trainers to be capable. Because I've noticed that confidence is at an all-time low at dog trainers. It's one of those where you're like, you're not confident because you know that you're not being able to do this very well. And then not being able to do these different aspects very well is making you not confident, and it's making you less capable. And I think being capable and being confident are inextricably linked. So my job is to create and to help trainers know that they can do it because they actually can. So that's the sort of thing that I'm going to be doing over the next year and a half. I've got planned, really. So that's exciting. So that's the whole journey. That's it in a nutshell.
Just in a nutshell. No, that's amazing. It sounds like you've been on a really amazing journey, and you've done so many varied things so far. And I think what you're planning next is really important for dog training as well. I think especially as I remember when I first started dog training, many years ago, I think because it's one of those industries that everyone's self-employed, really. There's very few places where you can go and work, and the place I worked at so it didn't necessarily give me the confidence and such, and so I think although there's a lot more help and there's a lot more courses there these days, dog trainers typically, they say they work for themselves. And I'm a qualified RTT therapist as well, so I now work with humans as well, changing their behavior and stuff. And so many of their limiting beliefs, it's almost like the confidence thing is because they don't feel good enough, and because they worry that and it's almost like because they haven't got someone training them up and telling them exactly what to do or anything like that, it can be really, really tough for them. So so I think it's really, really good that you're doing.
And I think because there's no, so I've spoken in Parliament 4 times, and I sit on AppDog, which is like an all-party welfare group for Parliament. And one of the things that we have been looking at is regulation. And whilst I don't think that'll go ahead this year, just because of the XL ban kind of took over that type of stuff, I do think that part of the problem is a lack of regulation, simply because there's no low benchmark. So when there's no lowest benchmark to say to you, until you can do these things, you are not a dog trainer. If that doesn't exist, then you're constantly fighting your own idea that does exist invisibly somewhere, and that you're not good enough. Because there's no finite way of going, I am good enough, look, because even if I'm right at the bottom of that, I have overstepped that. I have stepped over that threshold. I am not.
And I think the dog training industry as a whole is generally very unregulated anyway.
But I think it's more than that also. I think it's the negativity sometimes. I remember when I was starting out, there's no support system. And I mean, you post one thing or you say one thing that's slightly wrong or different to what other people think, and then you just get shut down, and there goes your confidence, which wasn't high to begin with. And then it's very difficult working to get back in there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a real fear of new ideas as well in dog training, which I think is one of those things that happens when an industry is as insecure as our industry is. It means if anybody thinks differently, they get massively cut down. And there's a funny thing that I've seen happen, which is that there's become, and it seems to be more one side of the industry than the other, but there's definitely been an over-reliance on science a presentation of science as if it's fact. And therefore there's this thing that if science says it, it's correct. Nobody's allowed any other views, which is just not what science is or how it works anyway. But nobody's allowed any other views. And if there isn't science to say it, then you shouldn't have that opinion because it's not backed up by science. Now, to start with, science isn't fact. Science is an exploration of fact. And if you take an example of a study like the study on mirror neurons, which are like this idea that there was this concept and this kind of study that looked at visualizations, and basically if you were to watch someone play basketball for enough time and really visualize it, there was a theory that you would develop the neuropathways to act it, right?
Yeah,
basically. So that's very, very oversimplified, but basically.
Yeah.
So then over the course of the next 10 years, there were so many studies on mirror neurons that debunked and then rebunked and then rebrought them up again and then debunked them again and then rebrought them up again. And to me, when I look at that pathway, I think that is beautiful science. That's an idea that's being looked at through hundreds of different lenses over time and space, and we're saying it's kind of true, but it isn't true, and it's true here, but it's not true here, and that's what science does. But for some reason, people instead in the dog training industry on one paper and say this paper says this, and therefore this is fact, and therefore if you have any view that isn't this, then that's non-factual, and it means that you don't know what you're talking about, and therefore if you have a new idea, and people seem to forget the fact that good science, and I think that a majority these days of canine behaviour science isn't good science, but good science stems from the ideas of those who have experience. That's where good science comes from. The ideas, like, you know, the ideas of, hold on, I think dogs do, I spend all my day training dogs to do these things, and having watched a million dogs do these things, I have this idea that I haven't seen that's been explored. I would like science to now test that idea. And that's beautiful science.
Yeah.
But those new ideas have to happen as a result of it. But instead, if you have a new idea, you are annihilated.
Yeah.
Annihilated.
Yeah, definitely. And if it doesn't fit in within the organizations that you get in the dog training and behavior world and stuff, then you're kind of shunted. And I think especially in the positive reinforcement trainer world as well, especially at the moment on social media, like I've never been a huge social media fan, and I literally go on just to do my business stuff, but I've never been one for, you know, engaging in Facebook groups and stuff, just purely because of like you just get like shut down. And for people that say they're positive reinforcement trainers, the way they treat each other, I think is just really like quite shocking sometimes.
About 7 years ago, maybe even longer, probably longer now. It must have been before Santina, so it must have been more than 7 years. It must have been about 8 years ago. I wrote a breakup letter to the forcery community. And I wrote it.
I remember actually, yeah.
I wrote it as if it was a breakup letter to a boyfriend. It was like, you know, like we used to have such a good time and blah 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 blah. And I did that for that reason, because I felt like I was so mistreated by that community. Like, you know, everybody was all like, you know, we need a positive reinforcement trainer on television. We don't want Caesar Milan anymore. And so then I was like, okay, I'll rise to that helm. And so then I'd put out TV shows, and then I'd find out that positive reinforcement trainers had complained about my TV shows to Ofcom. And I had to go through like a whole, like for one show that I did, I had to go through like a whole proper like process of proving my qualifications, proving that what I was doing was based on experience, proving that I had the sign off of a child psychologist to do these things, proving that it wasn't based solely on Skinner's ideas, and that I had an understanding of the rest of the science. I had to do all of that, not because a trainer who used tools was cross that I was not using tools, but because someone who trained the same as me, who had been pushing for people like me to be on television, was arsey because I wasn't part of their organisation.
No,
I've been absolutely slated, and I think more recently than ever, and especially since coming out of socks, I suppose, but more recently than ever, and since I started doing sports, which was about how old's Blake? Blake's 10, so 7 years ago when I started doing protection sports, and started working a lot more with balance trainers and becoming part of that community. You know, and since I did Canine Paradigm, so for the last like maybe 4 years, I've really been pushing hard about like, let's bridge all the gaps in dog training. We shouldn't be thinking about this. Let's all work together. Let's not be judgmental about each other's choices. Let's try and understand, you know, understand everything, because as soon as you start understanding it, your opinion on it will change. But sometimes I feel like I'm the only one walking over that bridge, because I feel like I've got people from both sides just trying to like reach up and push me in the water. And it's really difficult. And a lot of the podcasts that I've been doing lately, a lot of the workshops I've been doing lately have been for the balance community, and it's frustrating because, to be completely honest, looking at tool use as a way of defining what type of trainer you are is just stupid. Bullshit. It's like absolutely stupid. It's for people who don't use tools to say that the people that do use tools do it for ego. It is so ludicrous when you actually consider the general pillars of ethics that we should have around dog training, and see how tools fit into those ethics. Because really, if we were to take dog trainer ego out of the equation and we were to look at the dogs, we have to respect the fact that just like the dogs choose what is reinforcing, the dogs also choose what is aversive. And it's our job, surely, to be able to say, well, the most effective, least aversive protocol for this dog, I don't know, is a prong collar over a head halty, because the dog fucking hates the head halty, because he's, I don't know, an English Mastiff and it's squishing his face in, and he just doesn't like something on his face. He's got face sensitivities because he's got, I don't know, whatever skin issues. And actually putting him on a slip lead or putting him on a prong collar and training him like that is going to have the same effect, because the halty is just negative reinforcement after all anyway. And therefore, as a trainer who holds ethics in high regard, I'm going to choose this tool over that one, because that dog finds it less aversive. Not me as a trainer finds it more or less aversive. So for me, when it comes to looking at ethics in dog training, tools shouldn't be considered like that, because, you know, and people kind of people decide they're going to draw the pyramid, how they're going to draw it, and they say e-collars and prong collars are at this end, and actually for a lot of dogs they aren't, and it depends on how they're used. And then when I start talking about things like that, I get annihilated, because I don't want to know how they're used. And it's like, but in order to have an opinion on it, especially in order for you to say, I don't want that in my life, I don't want those things to be used in dog training, in order to have that really, really strong opinion like that, you need to at least have some recognition and some understanding of how they're used and what they are. And that recognition and understanding needs to post-date 10 years ago, when the only collars on offer were really shitty e-collars that didn't work very well, and the only way of using them was lighting the dog up when they got it wrong. Because the technology and the systems in using things like e-collars and prong collars now has so far outgrown that. There are hundreds of different systems that you can use now. There are hundreds of different brands, different types. You know, even if you feel like a chameleon against your skin compared to like a mini educator against your skin, they feel differently. There's so many different variations. And I still don't use tools, but at least I've got a decent enough understanding not to judge those that do use tools, and to be able to look at people who use tools and go, oh, well, they're using the NAPO system and they're using the chameleon on that dog, and they've conditioned the e-collar in this way to mean this. And therefore, when it comes to my ethical boundaries, that use is actually sufficient. It ticks all of my boxes. So I'm not going to have any judgment over them using it, and then be able to look at this guy over here who's frying his dog when it doesn't go into a down on some cheap Chinese collar and go, that's abuse, that's clearly abuse. It's not the tool that's abusing that dog, because that tool can be used like that, really elegantly and delicately. It's that guy who is just abusing his dog, and if I took that tool away from him, he'd be using his boot or a stick anyway.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, it is all about how you use the tools, because, you know, a flat collar could be abusive in the wrong hands, for
Yeah.
example. And so and I think probably a lot of the positive reinforcement trainers, you're never taught how to use those tools correctly. Because I suppose you see from the
Why
protection
wouldn't
point of
you?
view.
Why
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
and sadly, actually, I was talking to the guys at YCA about this the other day, and sadly, there isn't really a place for positive reinforcement trainers to feel safe discussing and learning about these tools. And I have had quite a lot of people come to me and say, well, where is there somewhere you can recommend where I can learn about this? But like, I don't want to see it. I don't want to, like, to me, it still feels very aversive.
Yeah.
I still have a massive cognitive dissonance against it, and I find that emotional and difficult. However, I do want to learn about it. I do feel like it's my responsibility. How can I do that in a way that is where I'm not going to be touched? And sadly, the balance community are also very biased against the positive community in that way, in that, you know, there's a lot of hatred, like, oh, well, you're not a vegetarian, so, you know, you're feeding your dog meat treats and, you know, blah 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 blah. And it's just like, let's just stop slagging each other off. Let's just
work together.
work together and train dogs and talk about training dogs.
Yeah.
And what's beautiful is I've had some fantastic conversations with people lately, and tools haven't even come up. We haven't we're talking about actual dog training and actual and behavior modification and assessments, and, you know, and comparing, like, oh, what do you think? Oh, I don't know, I think that dog's defensive, I don't think there's any element of fear in it. And but like really getting down to the nitty-gritty of dogs, which is a beautiful thing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And do you think, like, since you've been working more with other balance trainers, since you've been doing more protection sports, do you think your approach to dog training has changed, or is it still along the same ethics and like ethos? And
I have the same ethics. So I have, like, for me, there's like 4 main contingents when I look at dog training, and that they've always stayed the same throughout my whole career, really. Which is, one of the things that's really important to me is clarity. Is the dog clear? Does the dog understand the lesson? Because I think that, like, when we look at things like redirection and actually a lot of the behavior problems come from a lack of clarity, like lack of structure, lack of boundaries, lack of understanding of what is expected of me in this moment and what you're asking me to do. So clarity is a big one for me. Efficacy, how effective something is really important. I think that's ethical. That's important both for the dog and for the dog owner. You know, like is it effective? Is that effective? Which is really important to me. Because if it's not effective, if you're not going to meet your goal, then it's pointless. And in my experience, dog training learning happens quite fast. Like, if we're still working on something and it's been like 8 weeks and the dog's not nailing it, then that's poor dog training, because the efficacy is so low. So kindness, obviously, like intention really is what I'd call is the intention here good? Is the intention here for the good of the dog? And sometimes that sounds like a very simple question, like, well, of course it is, we all love our dogs. But, you know, I've slipped up in intention sometimes, because sometimes I'll be putting, like, me wanting to get my dog to do something above how the dog is feeling. Or sometimes I will, especially in sports, it's very easy to get greedy, it's very easy to get like that. Or sometimes I will, like, my intention will be like, I need him to stop doing that behavior, and so my intention there isn't actually that good. Whereas, like, if I step out of that and I look through my 4 pillars and I think to myself, well, is what I'm doing ethical? I think to myself, my intention really should be to teach him what I need him to do in that situation, not just to get that done. And then the last one, it really is time. Like I said, good dog training is quite fast. And so something has to, for a method, or for us to train something, for it to be ethical, in my mind, it has to happen quite quickly, especially with behavior modification. Because if you think about it, that every second that the dog is still participating in the behavior, their emotions are still heightened. They're still, you know, they're still at a point where they're not in a good emotional place, or they're in a, you know, a shambolic emotional space or whatever. So those are the 4 things that I've always kind of held true to. When I first started, what was it, protection sport? you know what, it wasn't. It was a dog that we had that was really, really predatory, that kind of changed my opinion on these things. So at the beginning, I'd been taught how awful the e-collar was and how terrible anybody who used tools was at the beginning. And I was like in that camp, and when I met my ex-partner, he had just gone viral with a video where he'd smashed up an e-collar. And
I remember that. Yeah.
very much that time.
Yeah.
And I don't give myself any shit for being like that back then, because when you think about the evolution of dog training, and particularly like the evolution of positive reinforcement training came off a time whereby, as I say, the technology wasn't there, the e-collars were shit, the methodology wasn't there, the way that they were being used was horrible. And the vast majority, 99.9% of people who were using e-collars were using them poorly, and they were annihilating dogs. And I was getting dogs through my door every day with burns on their necks, and with dogs that were completely shut down, and German shepherds that were hiding under the sofa at like 15 weeks old, having just been annihilated by a dog trainer. And at that time, back then, 15 years or so ago, it was also a time where compulsion training came kind of from the army, really, and from those types of trainer. And those types of trainer were squirting dogs in the face with water, were using the chains, chucking the chains on the floor, but to start all the dogs. They were doing lots of alpha rolling, etc., etc. It was horrible. It was a horrible time. And so positive reinforcement training actually came off the back of that, and they said, we need to be rewarding the dogs for getting it right, we need to be teaching the dogs to get it right. And when that first started happening, it was great, because if you look back at all the books, even like the old Jean Donaldson books and a lot of the old even Victoria Stilwell shows and stuff, it wasn't positive training as we know it now.
Yeah.
The dog gets up on the counter, you grab it by the collar, you say no, put it on the floor, but give it a treat. Actually, positive reinforcement based training back then was incredibly similar to what is good balance training now. It was about teaching the dog to get it right, setting the dog up so they don't fail, and then having a decent dialogue where you can tell the dog when they failed and when they succeeded, which to me is just really good dog training.
Yeah.
But what has happened over the years is that there's become this really, really commercial push, and it's super interesting for me from both a parliamentary standpoint as to sitting in that group, as well as from the TV stuff that I do, to see how much the media now has pushed the positive reinforcement stuff so hard that people like the Veterinary Association, things like that, have got this massive cognitive distance. They won't even look at the other ideas. And if that was back then, that would be fine for me. It wouldn't bother me. I'd be like, yeah, absolutely, throw those old shitty shock collars off the cliff. And yeah, absolutely, we shouldn't be training our dogs using pinning dogs down and, you know, blah, 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 blah. That was right for back then. But what's happened is, as always happens in anything like this, is that you've now got two polarized views.
Yeah.
You have the people who are positive reinforcement based, but like literally won't say no to their dog, like what is aversive, and this real obsession about not ever using anything aversive to the dog in a way that's completely driven by the ego of the trainer, and not actually looking at what is and isn't aversive to the dog. Simplifying it down to a moment-to-moment selection of operant conditioning protocols, whereby in the training situation, in that moment, if you add something and it reduces behavior, it is positive punishment, and therefore you shouldn't do it, without any respect for the fact that actually if you correct a dog for, let's say, barking at another dog in that moment, when the dog does know what he's meant to be doing but chooses to do something else, that might give him a much longer, happier life for the next 9 years. No respect for that at all. No respect for the consequences long term. Just looking at everything in these tiny little acute moments, which is just madness.
So then what would you say makes a good dog trainer now? So what you thought before versus now?
I think a good dog trainer now is, and I'm going to hate myself for using this word, but balance. But I mean that genuinely. Like, so my big problem with the balance community, and having spent a lot of time with balance trainers, is that the vast majority of them are wolves in sheep's clothing, and they're still the same as what they used to be. They're still the same old compulsion trainers. They're just calling themselves balance now because they occasionally give the dog a treat. And I do think that the motivation game and the reinforcement game of a lot of balance trainers needs to be better, a lot better, and to form a lot more of the foundation of the dog's training. I think that what makes a decent dog trainer now is they've got to have three things, which is good mechanics, and good mechanics comes from repetition and rehearsal. So they have to be able to maneuver the dog and show the dog what they need to do in a given situation using motivation and pressure. So, and when I talk about pressure, I'm talking about, eye contact, shoulder posture, moving into dogs, things like that, spatial pressure. I'm not talking about using anything that, like anything other than that really at the moment. But
yeah,
so they have to be able to maneuver the dog into a situation whereby it's participating in the behavior that they want it to do mechanically. And that is an art form. It's a mechanical skill that comes from hours of training your own dogs more than anything, and hours of really using your body and learning to use your body in a way that can confidently communicate to the dog what it needs to do. That's one thing. The other thing they need to be able to have is a true understanding of the dog's own language. So their body language and who they are, and an understanding of the way different breeds display that different body language. A great example of a poor representation of that was at Victoria Stilwell's Bite conference 2, 3, 4 years ago. A friend of mine, Kamal Fernandez, who's an obedience trainer, had one of his Mallees. I think it was, can't remember which one it was, but he had one of his Mallees up on the stage in a crate, and was using it for demonstration. And one of the participants called up and they said, "Your dog is so stressed, like you've got it in, you shouldn't be up here." And he looked at me and was like, "He's not stressed." He's like, and I use him for demonstrations all the time. They're like, "The dog's so stressed, look, it's participating in all the behaviors we know to be stressful." And loads of the audience were really upset by the fact that he had this dog on stage because it was panting and it didn't stop moving, and it had like lots of expression, its ears were back, etc., etc. Now, having lived with, I think at our maximum we had 15 Malinois living with us up on the mountains, I can genuinely say that that's just how they are. That's like Blake doesn't stop moving, he pants all the time. He has like this really over exaggerated expression, almost of appeasement a lot of the time. Like, especially if I put him in a down, he's going to lick his lips and his ears are going to go back. And that's not, like, I've never trained him with anything like that. But that's so having a good understanding of how dogs display behavior and how different breeds display their behavior in order to assess them based on who they are, not based on the idea of what you've got as a dog. So you need those things. You also need a genuine, slightly more academic understanding of what a dog is, like in terms of predator, scavenger behavior, in terms of domestication process, in terms of how different dogs being bred for different purposes, hunting dogs, fighting dogs, etc., etc., who they are, what their genetic story is, and how that is likely to express over the timeline of the dog's life. You need to understand that. And then I got in trouble the other day for not saying you also need to understand how to work with people, but I want to caveat that. I don't think that you do need I don't think a dog trainer needs any type of qualification or training in how to act with a human. They just need to act with a human with common decency. Like, I don't think you need to learn, like lots of people have been pushing the idea that you have in a dog training course, you should have a whole module on working with people. But I'm like, yeah, but if you're learning to be a carpenter, you wouldn't. If you're learning to be a mechanic, you wouldn't. If you're learning to be a hairdresser, you wouldn't. But my hope is that everybody knows that when you talk to someone, you have eye contact, because that's common decency, and that you try to explain things in the ways that they understand it. As dog trainers, we understand so much about learning, and we should understand about how dogs learn. Just apply that to humans, because it's the same.
Yeah. No, definitely. Yeah, completely agree with you. And when you were saying about, like when you're talking about genetics and the type of dogs and everything. So I know you said in one of your reels the other day about you don't necessarily socialize bull terrier puppies. Can you kind of go more into that and like why you wouldn't do that? And also as well for dog trainers, how could you then progress that on to actually kind of telling your clients with bull breeds or like with bull terrier puppies, for example, because I've had shit years and years ago from like owners where they have had like a bully that hasn't been suitable for say like a puppy class, for example, and then they've called us breedist for not allowing the dog back to class, whereas actually, and so I think a lot of people then kind of get, because there is such a stigma, especially in the UK at the moment with everything kind of going on and stuff. Yeah, can you just explain a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. So for me, I think one of the big problems that we have is there was this fashion for a little while because of a couple of studies that came out. Couple of studies came out. Another one came out maybe 2 or 3 years ago, but before that, there were these studies that came out that looked at the differences between working lines, show lines, and different breeds. And they found out that there was more variation between a working cocker and a show cocker than there was between I think, cocker spaniel and a border collie. Okay, so basically what that tells us is that there was more variation within the breed than there was between breeds. And so the idea that was pushed to press, because unfortunately, especially in our industry, science has become about press, because the more press science gets, the more press a paper gets, the more likely the university is to get funding, etc. And so this message that was pushed was there's more variation between breeds than there is within breeds. And then there's another paper that came out that had the similar results. And then last year there was a whole bunch that looked at a whole bunch of traits that found the same again. And so there's been this big notion, again, like what I was saying earlier, where this is now fact. It is now fact that breed doesn't matter, that breed isn't important. And I always joke with people whenever they try and bring that up at seminars. I always say to them, so you're going to say to a first-time dog owner, get a Malinois. And you're going to say to a protection handler, get a Basset Hound. I said, you're not, because you're not stupid. And we know that there is massive variation within breed. And actually, I think what those studies tell us is how much variation we've bred between working and show lines, which is a much more applicable a notion that actually, if the scientists had spent any time with dogs at all, they would go, oh, that's what this study tells us. It doesn't tell us that there's no variations between the breeds. It actually just tells us how much difference there is between a show cocker and a working cocker, and that maybe they should be called something different. Same as your German Shepherds. There's lots of other examples of breeds that have got such a difference.
Yeah.
But because of this like weird fashion, that has filtered down to mainstream now, and there is this thing about being breedist is the same as being racist and all this type of stuff, which is crazy. But it is my opinion that actually I think we need to make more discrepancies between breeds. Like when I had School for Dogs, I used to run bully specific classes just for the bullies, mainly because I love them so much. I like working with them, but also because it was a problem at the time where I lived. And it made sense to just ring fence them all and talk more about their history and stuff. So for me, it's about respecting biology. It's about respecting the genetic history of a dog. When it comes to fighting breeds, dogs that were bred to fight one another, there is and dogs that were bred to bait bulls and bears. So anything that comes from the bull and terrier, really, we have to respect the history and the lineage. They've been bred hard to jump up, grab hold, not let go. And we see this in their behaviour a lot, and they've also been bred to be game for combat. And being game for combat means seeking opposition, looking for opportunities to be opposed and to oppose, enjoying those opportunities, enjoying lots of physical contact. And when the puppies are young, but before their adolescence, I like to think of it like anybody who's read any of the Golden Compass, the Golden Compass, and the Philip books, right? There's a notion in these fictional books. All the characters live in this world, and they basically have like an animal representation of their soul, right? And they call it a demon. I always think about what mine would be. I'm sure anybody who's read those books will spend hours thinking about what theirs would be. But what I love about them is that before the kids reach like 14, 15, before they hit adolescence and move through adolescence, that it shape shifts all the time. It's constantly shape shifting. It doesn't shape shift between every animal in the world. It just shape shifts between these kind of like ranges of animals. Okay, so maybe it'll be a puma, and then it'll be a tiger, and then it'll be a house cat, and then it'll be and it hasn't decided what it's going to be yet, but there's definitely a range of animals that it's likely to be. Like it's not going to go from a fish to a dolphin, from a fish to a bird to a dog. And I love that, because I think that's a beautiful visual representation of genetic range, right? And the bully breeds, when they have their genetic range, will often stem between like ranges of dog aggression, right? And occasionally you get a unicorn, and you get a dog that is genuinely wicked with other dogs. Like genuine. I've had quite a few staffies these days that are actually genuinely wicked with other dogs. Like really nice, really respectful, no problems at all. But the tendency, the trend, especially in the more athletically bred dogs, because the way that they're bred to look will impact their behavior trends as well, because there's the behavior and the looks are tied together through genetics. So these more athletic bred dogs are generally that genetic range when they're deciding who their soul is going to be during that key period, where the experiences of the dog is going to kind of shape shift their soul and decide who they're going to be. It tends towards dog aggression. So if we give them any opportunity to bully another dog, to poke the bear, or to get in a situation where conflict is likely, their genes come alive and express, and those little soul representations shapeshift into the fighting dog that they were hundreds of years ago. And I've seen it so many times. Like I've seen it a million times in badly run puppy classes, whereby you have a little bully breed, you put it on the floor, you've got your timid little Cavalier King Charles Spaniel over there, dog flies out, can smell what that dog's like. You can almost see the genes go ching, and the dog just go rah, and then love it, feel like a lion. And then it's badly managed, because the dog's then pulled off the other dog, the owners feel awful, and then the owners feel huge pressure. My dog needs to play with loads of other puppies because it needs to get better. And what they don't realise is the dog isn't going to get better at the nice parts. He's only going to get better at the bad parts. It's only going to become more and more intrinsically reinforcing. And I see it so often that when I look at the athletic bred bully breeds, I generally say, your best case scenario, the nicest thing that your dog's soul can shapeshift into, until it reaches about maturity. So for those dogs, I'd say around 2, until it reaches some level of maturity, is going to be neutrality and tolerance. That's what you need to aim for, and that's what we need to aim for. And if we're lucky and we can get that dog to never have those genes expressed by the time it's 2, to never have a bad experience. I say a bad experience, actually for that dog it's probably a wicked experience, but to never have those experiences that shape shift that little soul into this fighting dog, and that allow the dog to practice and participate in those behaviors between the age of when you get it and 2. And instead we massively reinforce externally the dog being completely neutral, the dog not caring about other dogs, finding other things more interesting, and tolerating it if another dog comes over to him whilst maintaining engagement with the owner. Then by the time the dog's 2, it can start to develop relationships and have friendships and things like that. So I developed an anti-socialization protocol, which is basically lots of exercises designed to practice exactly what I've just described there. And that's what I would give to puppy classes when it comes to the more athletically bred bully breeds. And our job as dog trainers is to be able to look at those puppies and watch their behavior around the other dogs, watch their fixations, etc., and be able to pinpoint it and go, yeah, I'm going to put that dog on that protocol, I'm going to put that dog on that protocol, and have lots of different protocols for different dogs of different breeds, to ensure that during those really sensitive periods when the genetic range is being, when those souls are being shapeshifted and that dog is deciding who it is, that it becomes the best version of itself.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's so true, like with the different types of dogs, because I remember when my ex-partner and I moved in together, he had this huge, muscular, powerful bulldog that he had never done any training with. Typical South African style, like dog training. It's like we're still very behind here from the UK. And I've got I do agility, so I've got border collies, shelties, and stuff. And you could see his bulldog, and obviously it was just left to me to do all the training and stuff because he was just at work the whole time and stuff. And so you could see he got a complete kick out of like poking the bear out of like Spirit, my male border collie, and you could see like the enjoyment and like and it's like there were a couple of times where he did try it with my male border collie and like I'd separate them and then he would just want to go back for more. He was just like you could see that like adrenaline and that excitement, and he was loving it. He was absolutely loving it.
And dogs hate talking about this. They hate talking about it. They hate talking about the dogs. The dogs love it, Scrap.
Yeah.
No, he absolutely loved it. He was like, and like he'd never been socialized properly or any, he'd always been kind of kept away from other dogs, or like there's a lot of like fence fighting here in South Africa because there's a lot of like dogs just left out in the garden all day, so they just shout and lunge and go crazy at dogs walking past on the road. And it was he'd only ever road walked, and we thought he was and my partner at the time, he thought he was going to be super placid and everything, but he was a horror with my dogs. It took me months and months of just management and training and everything, and in the end we broke up, so the dog moved out. In the end, actually, my collies were so happy because they, what collies are like, they don't like that like, body bashing and all that, so my collies were like so happy when he left. It was just like
the collies are opposites, so they're
short
I
and
would put border collies on the opposite. Like if I had like a blue to red spectrum, the collies are blue and the bullies are red. And they all completely and they just want tactile. But collies, they're a herding breed, and when they touch the sheep, that's something's gone wrong.
Yes.
When there's any level of tactile, something has gone wrong. Whereas the bullies, when there's tactile, it's going in the right direction. The more tactile, the better. If there's no tactile, something's gone wrong. And so you've got complete opposite ends of the spectrum when it comes to how it feels to be touched by something. So you've got one that seeks it out constantly, seeks out this like, I want us to have conflict because that's what I'm bred for. It's bred literally against conflict. Like if a sheep or a ram turns and faces him, there's trouble. This is not a good thing. He wants to see the back of the animal all the time. So it's surprising to me that we even consider them the same species.
No, it is. It's crazy. And like Spirit, again, my male border collie, he one of my friends has a pit bull, and at first, and she would be like body bashing him and wanting to play, and he liked her, but he had no idea how to interact with her at all. It was like two different species, and he didn't know what to do. So in the end, he just started humping her because he's like, I'm excited, but I don't know what to do. And in the end, he kind of learned how to play with her. But in the end, after a while, I did have to separate them because she was just getting too much. And I'm like, okay, agility, injuries, no. It's just like too much body bashing and stuff. But he had absolutely no idea how to communicate with this dog that just wanted to like body slam him and like, have a really good time. And they are, it's so true. They are completely different species. It's crazy.
My ex, he had his first Mally, and I had my pit bull Archie, and we had the same for like that the entire time that we were together until Archie died when he was 14. And before Archie died, like for the entire time, it was constantly rotations of periods of time where they'd have to be separated and they wouldn't be allowed to be together, and then they could probably manage walks together, and then they couldn't. They could not understand each other. They're both very different characters as well. They both had lots of similar. They had a similar value system, so they both wanted the same things at the same time. They wanted the same level of control, but they just spoke completely different languages.
And
anything Archie did that was kind of playful was taken with complete disdain and offence. Anything that Fizz did that was a sort of type of friendly was taken as seeking more conflict and more contact and more all the things that she didn't actually want.
No, it's so interesting. So this week in the news here in South Africa, a couple of days ago, It's been reported that 6 Mallees killed someone's domestic worker. Okay, so this is all like in the news and everything. Typical. And obviously with like, you know, all the XL bully ban and everything in the UK and that kind of thing. What is your opinion on like how can things like this be avoided? Because obviously the Dangerous Dogs Act does absolutely nothing, but like what's your opinion on like what people can actually do, or how can they be educated about these breeds and everything? Because obviously these 6 Mallees, they were in like the town that they're in is like such a remote town that these dogs definitely won't have been worked, like 6 of them in a giant pack, probably no enrichment whatsoever. I don't know, how can like the message be kind of put across to people? Like, what's your opinion on like what would be best?
My opinion has gone round in circles for decades, but my opinion, it stands that I think we need much tighter, much smarter regulations when it comes to breeding. I think that's going to be the main thing that will impact this. So I think that there needs to be, it's 2 main things that could almost get rid of this. The first one would be a cap on how much it costs to buy a dog. I think that's a massive one. If you couldn't buy a dog for more than, even if we say something like 2 grand, you can't buy a dog for more than 2 grand. That's going to change what breeders are breeding what dogs massively. Because if you're selling your Mallees for, I was at a trial the other day and there was a Doberman there that had just been sold for 60 grand. And like if you're selling your dogs for, you know, between 20 and 60 grand for these dogs, then it doesn't matter that it's going to take you breeding 30 shit versions of that don't have a place anywhere in order to get that dog, because it's worth it. It's worth it to get the blue color and the, you know, the right physical traits with the right mental traits. It doesn't matter that you've had to breed, you know, 10 really shit versions that aren't quite working, aren't quite pet, don't have a place, look really rubbish, etc, etc. And additionally, it's going to change, and it's also going to change the types of dogs that people are breeding. Because if I'm breeding for money, so I'm going to breed the most fashionable dog at the moment, I'm going to breed, let's say I'm breeding Mallees or breeding working Mallees because that's the cool thing to breed and because I can get 5, 6, 7 grand for them. If that's capped and I can only get 2 grand for any dog, I'm gonna breed something like a Pomeranian instead, because A, the litter size is going to be bigger. B, it's going to be significantly easier to keep and raise them. Everything is smaller, everything is cheaper, less food. So I think having a cap on how much dogs cost is a big one. I think having there needs to be, in some Northern European countries that I visited, they have really strict breed clubs. Okay, and in order to buy a dog from that breed, you speak to the breed club. That's where everybody goes. It's kind of like the Kennel Club, but significantly better. And so, for example, I might be part of the pit bull ambassador breed thing, and therefore, if someone wants a pit bull, I might be one of the people that they ring to ask for a reference, as in like what do you think of the breed? Do you think they make a good family dog? Like what experiences have you got with the breed? So on and so forth. And also what that does is that allows everybody who wants one of those dogs has to go through the breed club. They have to apply to the breed club to get that breed. So that immediately gives us loads of data on how many people of which breeds, how many people want which breed, right? So that tells us that maybe there are 20 people that want Norfolk Terriers and there are 10 people that want Staffordshire Bull Terriers and there are 30 people that want Frenchies. And that then informs how many breeders they're allowed to breed those breeds. And so they can say, you know, supply and demand, there is 100 demand, and therefore we need to meet that with 100 supply. Instead of what happens at the moment, which is that the breeds that are fashionable, there are so many of them, they're so accessible. And then when someone's looking for a dog, they're like, oh, I quite like the look of a German Shepherd. There's thousands of them. I quite like the look of a Mallee. There's thousands of them. Civilians don't really massively see the difference. They're both pointy, shepherdy type dogs. That one looks a bit cooler and was in John Wick. I think I'll have that one.
Yeah.
And so I think that having that and having that additional step whereby you have to go to the breed organisation and say, I would like one of this breed, pushes making that choice rather than looking at what's available in front of you and just going through Gumtree. It pushes this point of going, well, hold on, let's step back. What breed do we want? What are they bred to do? Now there's this one place that is a reliable source that I can go to for information about which breed I want, and then I can apply. So I think having better infrastructure like that. And then the last thing I think that would make a massive difference is I just don't understand why the whole world isn't using technology in the form of microchips to add so much more responsibility and accountability to dog ownership. Like, I just think that I don't understand why I should be able to have an app on my phone, or if that technology isn't possible, which I don't really understand why it isn't, but if it isn't, then I should be able to have a little microchip scanner downstairs and be able to go beep on this dog and be able to go, Hungarian Vizsla, she's old, she's got epilepsy, I can see the last few vet visits that she's done, what medication she's on, I can see behaviour notes, I can see what training she's had, I can see any notes that the owner's put on there, I can see what breeder she was bred to, I can see how many homes she's had. And then if I want to sell her, not that I would sell you, but if I wanted to sell her, it would be my legal responsibility, the same way that it is when you sell a car, to change over of logbook, if you like, and to I wouldn't be allowed to sell her until I had put in the microchip, the change of ownership. And therefore you would have a complete paper trail. It would be illegal to sell a puppy without a microchip, and therefore if you bought a puppy and it didn't have a microchip, you would be breaking the law. And when you went to your first vet visit and they scanned the dog and there wasn't a microchip, they would say, you need to take this dog back to the breeder because we can't see this dog unless it's an emergency at the vet's without a microchip. And then I think that would, because there'd be so much more accountability for everything. And then dogs could be flagged on the system too, like the amount of dogs that come through for having bitten someone over here, whereby when I speak to the police are like, yeah, we knew of the dog, like the dog's been a problem. And like every time the dog gets reported, it should go on their file. And then, oh, we can see that this dog's been reported 4 times. There should be, like, you know, for postmen, there could then be red flags on addresses. These are the addresses that where dogs are, and these are the addresses where postmen have been bitten in the past. There's so much that could be done with technology, with microchipping. I just don't understand why it isn't done.
Yeah, I know it is. It's crazy. It really is crazy.
Yeah, but I don't know, like thinking about like South Africa and how it is set up here, I don't think that's ever going to be a reality for us.
Definitely not.
We don't even have electricity half of the time. Like, to be able to do something like that. And I always also think back, like, a lot of there's still dog fighting here is very big, you know, and it's not something that's like far-fetched like people think, you know, it happens, but it's over there. Like, we know people, like neighbors whose uncle has run like a dog fighting ring, like people you would never expect. And yeah, from the beginning, obviously there's no responsible ownership, and a lot of those dogs could end up in shelters. You know, they might have been picked up off the street or dropped off or something because they weren't cut out for fighting, right? Like, they might love fighting, but they might not have been good enough, you know, to be selected and bred and kept in the competition and that. And then you also have a lot of people that are still not realistic about how genetics is included, you know, in the package. And, you know, they want to adopt a dog like that out to a home that has 6 other dogs, you know. So sometimes, yeah, I don't know. That would be great, but I don't know.
Yeah, the media has so much power now. The media has so much power now. It would be great if there was one of the charity commissions came forward and launched a decent, like a really decent, not some shitty, like boring advert, but like a really decent, cool campaign that made people think about these things. Like that would be super cool, because I do think that the media and what the media, like, look at how quickly the XL bullies became devil dogs.
Yeah, that's true. Very true.
So quick. It was like there was that one little boy that was killed, that one of the papers decided they were going to do this headline that was the same as the headline that they used in 1991 for the pit bulls, with exactly the same effect. Suddenly the Sun's involved, the newspaper over here that has quite a far reach. suddenly all the morning TV, you know, I'm being called up every single day. Can you come on this morning show? Can you come do BBC News at 10? Can you come? Like, there was a month where I could have done television like every day of the week. I had to turn them down because I was like, you know, I can't be bothered to drive back to London again. And because suddenly the media got hold of this message, these dogs are terrible and powerful and they're going to kill everyone, and they put it out there and it worked, and the government had to change everything, right? So imagine if that power could be used for good. Imagine if they gave exactly the same airtime to the idea of, you know, let's have a look at what a dog is, you know, genetic, environmental expression, etc., as well as, you know, what dog makes a good pet dog. The other thing that I think is quite interesting is in dog breeding, we as an industry, the dog training industry, as well as the dog industry full stop, give a hell of a lot of stick to people who are actually breeding decent pet dogs. And that frustrates me. You know, I've had a friend recently in America, and she's just bred a litter. I can't remember what they are now. Sorry, Kelly. They're like Plan Terrier cross Boston Terrier cross Frenchie. They're these little, small, cute, healthy, rambunctious, but not too rambunctious. No real drive to do anything, but fun, little squiggly gremlin. They're the perfect pet dog. They are the perfect dog. She has been annihilated online. Annihilated for this breeding, because she's like that. People are like, A, why are you breeding dogs when there are so many in shelters? B, you know, why have you bred a non-pedigree dog to a non-pedigree dog? Blah 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 blah. And I'm like, that breeding is exactly what people should be breeding. Let's get all of them, because the amount of bull herder breeding and Mallee breedings and stuff that I see online outnumbers that to about 1,000, but everyone's willing to congratulate this person for breeding their titled dog with this titled dog. And you think to yourself, well, actually, realistically, how many homes, like, yes, they're titled, yes, they're proven, yes, they're good dogs, but how many homes are there going to be for these working dogs? A lot less than there are for these little rambunctious gremlin puppies. Well, there should be. And instead we make this thing of like, look how cool these dogs are, when actually they're way cooler for a pet home.
100%. So back to something a little bit lighter. So how would you suggest we run puppy schools? Because there's so many things, you know, that can get in the way of doing it ideally. And it's also already kind of too late for a lot of people. They've gotten a puppy, they haven't done any breed research. We know a lot of people pick dogs because of their looks. So how do you run your puppy schools, you know, to try and you know, make sure everybody is good, is happy, you're doing the best you can for the dogs and the owners, but still, you know, helping them to realize that the breed they have is not maybe what they thought they were getting?
So the first thing I would say is that what I find interesting, so if we're going to be really, everybody's got to make a living, but what I would say is that if I would put a discount, I'd put my puppy classes, you get a discount, so maybe you get one class for free if you come to us before you get your puppy. Right, and that's it. And just for one telephone call, come to us, consultation call before you get your puppy, and you can have this class, or like one class for free, like one class out of 6 or whatever for free, or a discount, or like a 5% discount, or a free ball or something. Because I think we should be, instead of charging people for that, I think we should be incentivizing it, because it's going to make our life a lot easier. And we do build a culture where people do speak to dog trainers before they get their dog. But then when it comes to running the classes, you know, one of the things that I used to do at my puppy classes, which I really think is so good for owners, is that I would do at least 3 of the classes in public, not at. So I would do an urban one, a rural one, and a public transport one. Right, so 3 of the 6 classes we would be training in these environments. And what I found was really, really useful was to be able to point out the differences. Like, look, you're working on German Shepherd whilst we're walking through this antique shop. Look how vigilant he is on every single human that passes by, compared to this pointer whose nose has not got off the ground. because we can start to then, because when we're in this hall environment, the dogs do act more generically.
Yeah.
And we almost set it up because we're trying to standardize exercises.
Yeah.
Whereas when we take them out and about, those differences suddenly become so much more exaggerated and so much more powerful. So I think taking the dogs out of class is good for many, 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 many reasons, including really highlighting those massive differences and making it acceptable and fun to talk about. I always give a bit of homework in my first class, which is, right, you have to go away and you have to come back in the next class, or put it in the Facebook group or whatever you're going to do, and tell me a bit about the history of your breed. So I always put that in the puppy classes so that they go away and look at the history of their breed. And often they come back with absolute bullshit, and you're like, actually, you're completely wrong. Like, that's, you've obviously on a, you know, oh, well, my Staffordshire Bull Terrier was bred to be a nanny dog, and you're like, no. And other animals, and bears and bulls. And it gives you an opportunity to have a conversation about this stuff, and to be able to, and as such, we can see how much he loves tugging, compared to your guy over there who doesn't like putting anything in his mouth, because he was only bred to put dead things in his mouth and be really super soft with it. But you can see how possessive he is and how he doesn't like giving it back to you, because he was bred to parade it. Unlike your dog that is bred to have nothing in his mouth, and actually is getting him to put anything in his mouth is going to be very difficult.
Yeah.
So we can, we can definitely do that. The other thing is that I do like to group dogs in terms of their breed. So if I've got 2 gun dogs, I will sit the owners together if I can. I will sit, if you've got 2 German Shepherds, I will sit the owners together if I can, and I will then try and do a little bit of differentiation when it comes to exercises, whereby you go, right, we're going to do this exercise, but for your dog, we're going to do it differently because of the breed that he is. So, you know, when we're doing this exercise, because your dog is a breed that has a genetic predisposition towards resource guarding, instead of doing it like everybody else, you're going to do it like this. And pointing out to the whole group, because what you're doing is everybody in the group, look how different all of our dogs are. Look how important it was that you selected a dog based on their history.
Yeah, I think that's definitely like such a huge point that a lot of trainers do miss and stuff. And it's definitely one thing I do in my, so we normally do like our first puppy class, we do it on Zoom without the puppies, because we go through a lot of stuff, and then I give them stuff to do, and then they then come to class from like the following week and stuff. And then already, because they've already started doing little things, the dogs are already a bit more, but it's one of those things I always go on about. You know, your dogs were not bred to be pets, and they have, you know, do you all know why your dogs were originally bred to work? And it's amazing, actually, the amount of, I don't know, cockapoo owners, for example, that have no idea what like of what their genes are or anything like that. It's incredible.
There are some fantastic social media companies, I say social media companies, dog training companies that are very good at social media, that are doing a lot of good work in this sense, and I do think that that's starting to have an effect now, because dog training companies are starting to get so much more social media savvy, and starting to put up all these reels on TikTok, and you've got some like TikTok famous trainers now and stuff. And a lot of people slate that, but I think it's fantastic, because I think it's getting education out there. And whilst some of them are getting horrific education out there, there are also some other ones. And what I would say, it's like, I always try to look at the good in every situation. And if I look at Cesar Millan, what I think one of the really good things that Cesar Millan did was put dog training as a thing back in the front rooms of people thinking about dog training, and he really exaggerated the idea of this relationship between you and the dog and stuff. And whilst I don't agree with a lot of what he did that very well. And one of the really good things about the social media TikTok trainers, even the ones whose training techniques I think are poor and ineffective and shitty, that everybody is still kind of putting across the same message when it comes to puppy buying. If you look at it, everybody from, you know, from all the different sort of social media trainers, all of them are saying, select your dog based on their biology, genes matter, you know, it's really important to look at the history of where dogs come from. Like, your dog is this type of dog and therefore they're more or less like this. And the vast majority of the popular social media trainers, even if some of what they're saying I hate, all seem to be plastering the same messages when it comes to this stuff. So I do think that's going to have a trickle effect, and I do think owners are going to end up a bit more savvy when it comes to this stuff.
Yeah, no, definitely. Are there any kind of like up and coming trainers on social media that you're like excited about and stuff?
Yeah, loads. So things that I follow that I'm really excited about. So there's a girl called Danny Champion. She does champion dogs. She's quite a new trainer, but I really like her ability to communicate very basic dog training concepts to the public. And she's very likable. She's very relatable, and so I like the fact that I think she's doing some nice stuff. The guys I mentioned earlier, the Yorkshire Canine Academy, they are putting a lot of effort and money into really, really high quality social media. And for owners, some of the stuff that they're doing is super. It's like really like exceptional, one of the best I think at the moment in terms of like owner led content. Really, they're very much very, very funny, silly reels that people are going to enjoy watching, with these like tiny little bits of education in, which is exactly how it should be done. This is very good on social media at the moment. I've been watching. So Fran's always really good. So she's Fran, Fran the dog trainer. She's a good friend of mine, and I love her. She does lots of really good behaviour stuff. I really enjoy her behaviour modification-y stuff. It's a little bit deeper, a little bit more detailed than some of the other guys that I'm talking about. But again, it's really nice, and it's very. She's got a lot more into sport, obviously, over the last couple of years. But again, a lot of the behaviour stuff that she does, I really enjoy watching that. And let me think of the last one. Oh, so there's an if you're into the sportsy stuff, there's Sarah. What's her company called? The company's called Canimo Canine or something like that. I don't know. I'll put a link on here, or I'll send it to you. But they're much more balanced training style wise. But they have some really funny and very contentious videos about like the way things should be and stuff like that, and that's quite fun as well. I quite enjoy watching them as well.
Oh, yeah.
So I think I actually saw it on social media where you mentioned like the difference between a behavior problem being like a problem or just a phase. So can you just touch on that and explain it a little bit more?
Absolutely. So the vast majority of problem behavior that comes to me has been as a result of mismanagement of a phase. So before the dog reaches maturity, they're going to go through lots of different phases of development. And hormonally they're peaking and troughing and moving around so much. And when we look evolutionarily at how dogs develop when they are young, when they are dependent. And, for example, we see this elastic band where the dog won't move really away from us during this time. And then when they start to become independent and move away, and then, they go through these like teething and the two stages of teething. And then you also have like this period of time where the grey matter increases in the brain, and therefore risk-taking behaviour hugely increases. So the dog suddenly starts to feel very optimistic about taking risks, rather than when he first becomes independent at around the 6-month mark, he's very pessimistic about taking risks, which is where we see this kind of like, what's been classed as secondary fear period and stuff, because what happens is the dog suddenly becomes independent from its parents, and now the risks are real. And so the brain and the development of the dog tells the dog, be pessimistic, don't take your chances. And then when the dog starts moving towards like breeding age, then the opposite happens, and they say, you've got a bit of experience, you've survived so far in this wild world, so now we're going to give you this chemical boost of things like testosterone to make you feel a bit more confident about these choices, and we're going to exaggerate that risk-taking behavior because you're at your prime to breed. And so as a result of all of these different things, we see phases of behavior that come and go, including phases of aggression, phases of defensive behavior, phases of more possessive behavior, phases of teething, and it's completely understandable. But what happens is during the first 2 years of the dog's life, dog trainers are as much to blame as anyone else really, is that when these phases begin to occur, we're not very good at assessing them and going, this is a phase. If we look at how old the dog is participating in this behavior for very good reason, and therefore, you know, so for example, with this one, when she hit that kind of like that first primary independence, which for her was around probably between 5 and 7 months, she started to get really independent, and really she began to do all the HPR stuff of running 35 million miles away from me. And like suddenly the motivation to hunt really picked up and stuff like that. And you know what? During that time, I just put her on a lead. I just said, you're not going to go off lead during this time. I can see this as a phase, rather than consider this a recall problem and start to develop an issue between us. I'm just going to put you on a lead, and I'm going to manage the problem so that the problem doesn't occur during this phase. And then she hit about 9 months. I could see she was sensible again, and I just let her off the lead and we were good. Now, if I treated that like it was problematic, like it was a real problem, I think I would have created more of a problem than what was there. And that's a really real mild example. There's much more extreme examples. For example, with my Malinois, my female Malinois, when she went through her second fear period, around, how old was she? She must have been around, I'm going to say 9-10 months. Maybe a little later for her. She's quite slow, but she suddenly was a little bit reactive, a little bit too spicy. You know, I could see that she would nail someone. You know, if a stranger came and stroked her or came and approached her, she'd probably bite them. And she became very snappy and very, very aware of the environment. Sudden environmental change. Whoa! She'd start barking. Now, a less experienced handler would go, she's becoming reactive. What experiences have I given her that's making her reactive? I've tried so hard with building resilience, like I can see she's reactive. But because I've seen it a gazillion times before, I'm like, right, I'm just going to pattern her routine. So for the next 2 months, everything was the same. We didn't go anywhere new. We didn't do anything new. She didn't meet anybody new. I tried to keep her days as similar as possible. If I had the option to leave her in the van or to leave her at home, I would leave her in the van, leave her in the home, rather than take her with me, because I knew that she was going through this thing. It evened out. She's now beautifully social, lovely with people, lovely with everything. I just didn't give her the opportunity to express those genes. I didn't give her the opportunity for that shape shifting to happen, and for her to turn into that dog, because I could see it was a phase. If I treated that as if it was a problem and gone, right, I've got to go and counter condition this now, I've got to go and work through this now, I'm going to create a problem massively, especially in that phase. Because I'm going to sensitize her to it, and I'm going to give her more exposure during this period of time where she's not handling it very well, rather than less exposure. So, but I see dog trainers do it all the time. And I look at the age of the dog, and I look at the behavior that they're displaying, and I think, why are you working on that? Like, why? Like, I can, like, that's just, like, let that be. Like, just take it off the cards for a little while, because that dog's going to grow out of that behavior, and you're going to sensitize that dog to that situation.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Comes back to that thing about being capable and confident, and those linchpins of what a dog trainer needs to have, and that bit comes down to that kind of academic knowledge, not academic knowledge, but that knowledge base of going, how do dogs develop from when they're born to when they die? What stages do they go through approximately, and how do we see these stages play out in reality? And that does come from learning from books and things like that. That doesn't, you can't, it can come from experience, but often you can experience dogs going through those stages without ever really having analysed and thought about it.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's definitely something I've noticed from like experience of my own dogs, that they do go through those kinds of phases, and it's something that perhaps I did my behavior course many years ago. So things have changed a lot since then, but they don't talk about that kind of stuff. They just say, you know, okay, this is the behavior and this is how you deal with it and stuff. And so then I suppose there is then that like mentality that, okay, this dog is barking and lunging at other dogs and she's 9 months old, so let's, you know, it
comes down to that problem that the people who are writing those types of courses are not people with ample experience. I know that's helpful, but it's professors writing courses for professors. And so often I look at the scientists and I think, you're building scientists, you're not building dog trainers.
Yeah.
I was great at science. Like, I'm very good at remembering papers because I've just always had that type of brain. I'm very good at being able to tell you what the science says about things and recall studies. I was very good at being able to analyze studies, and that does help you because it makes you be able to look at a situation and go, what are the confounding variables in here? Like, how can I standardize this to repeat it in 2 months' time to see if I've applied the right methods to change the behavior, so on and so forth. It gives you a good ability to be able to look at a situation mechanically and objectively like this. Doesn't teach you about training dogs. And because the training you haven't had the ample experience of training dogs, they don't see what is important in the application. So they don't actually teaching that evolutionary stage of development of a dog. Whilst that might seem like a dog trainer wouldn't really need to know that, when we look at how it applies to the dog in front of us, you're only going to know that with a lot of experience working with dogs. You know, it does change that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Quick question regarding arousal and stuff. So if you have got, say, like a high drive dog, like, I don't know, a Mallee, Dutchie kind of thing, and they are just so over aroused by the environment and they've gone through adolescence and they're a little bit older and stuff, what kind of things would you start the client with as such?
For me, it's all about channeling. It's not about bringing it back down. And I think that we can put a lot more energy in anticipation. I think anticipation is one of the most untapped resources in dog training when it comes to stuff like this. So building behavior through anticipation is something I love doing with high drive breeds, because you're building this moment of which is still and it's quiet, but it's buzzing, and then you can push that buzz into some really nice behaviors, even things like solid downs and stuff like that. But you into that. So for me, it's about looking at the dog's arousal as potential energy and nothing more. Instead of seeing a negative thing, I don't try and reduce the arousal, because why would I try to reduce the potential energy? I would just look for, where can I put this energy in a way that's going to be super? And sometimes the owners are frustrated by this, because they'll say, well, I don't want the dog marching. I don't want him. I want him just to chill out. And I'm like, you've got the wrong dog for that, mate. Like, you've got two choices here. You're not going to the same as that lady over there with her loaf of bread pug. Like, you're not going to have that. That dog is going to do nothing, and your dog is going to do something. So you have the choice, and either it can leak out in all this horrible behavior, or we can go, this is how much energy is here. Let's put it in the right place.
No, absolutely. It's definitely one of the things that I do. Like, I train a lot of Mallee owners here. And you know, the dogs are say over aroused in the ring, for example. So what I do is then I increase the arousal level in training, because you know, they try and kind of calm the dog down, but I'm like, you can't. Like, it's like, you know, it's like the dogs are like just, you know, so, and actually it does really work just by getting the dog to like be in that state and stuff, you know, in training and stuff can really help.
I like looking at, to learn to put these windows, these like breaks between arousal for the dog. So teaching the dog a level of self-regulation that isn't about reducing their arousal, but it's about holding it. So teaching, for example, if you're going to do tunnel jump, dog walk, and the dog really loves the dog walk and the arousal is really pepped up, teaching the dog to break and go into a down in between these, and waiting for that moment where their mouth closes and they get that real, and then releasing the dog on, so that the dog begins to learn that they can hold the energy back and then rock it. Because that can get you some really nice behavior, but also really what we're teaching the dog there is we're teaching the dog go, no go. We're teaching the dog to regulate themselves.
No, absolutely. I just have one other quick question about Mallees that one of my friends wanted to ask. She said she wanted to know, is there anything that you would do with other puppies that you wouldn't necessarily do with a Mallee puppy, or like how would you bring up the Mallee puppy differently from?
So for me, with the Mallee puppies, my total focus is on neutrality to the environment, always. So I'm always looking for the dog to be neutral to the environment. I want him to ignore everything. I'm solidly focusing on habituating the dog to everything. I don't want the dog to give a shit about anything in the environment. So as a result of that, I do a lot of the box game. So there's a game called the box game. If you look it up, it's a game basically where you teach the dog to indicate in the box, and you throw treats in the box, and then you have lots of different distractions happening. And if the dog lifts its head out the box, the food stops coming, and then so the dog can switch the distractions on and off.
Yeah.
But they can also continue eating or not continue eating. I do loads of that with Mallee puppies, where I probably wouldn't, like if I had a Vizsla puppy again, or if I had a Bulldog puppy again, I probably, unless there was a problem, I probably wouldn't go there. Like I just wouldn't bother. It'd just be a waste of my time. I'd rather work on other stuff. Whereas with the Mallees, making them environmentally stable is something that's really important, because I think they are incredibly vigilant and they can become environmentally unstable so easily. The other stuff that I wouldn't, what else wouldn't I do with a Mallee puppy? And that's probably about it, really. There's stuff that I would do with a Mallee puppy. I can't think of much that I wouldn't do specifically with the Mallees. No, there isn't anything that I specifically wouldn't do with the Mallees, but there is quite a lot that I would do that I wouldn't bother doing with other dogs.
What else would you do?
I'd take them everywhere with me on lead, everywhere. Like don't leave that dog. Like for me, that dog doesn't let it be left at home. I think I've met probably one Malinois that's ever had separation anxiety. Like they're not prone to that. There doesn't seem to be a predisposition towards separation anxiety at all. So I would take that dog from day dot, from the minute it comes out, it goes everywhere with me. That's what I did with Fiasco. Like literally, I wouldn't move for her being somewhere with me. She'd come. If I could smuggle her into the cinema, which I once did, I would do. And the other thing that I would say, and this is for all puppies, but again, especially for those dogs that do tend to have a little bit more environmental sensitivities, and that's, I don't, especially with Mallees, I don't shirk away from stress.
Mm-hmm.
I will shirk away from panic. I don't want the dog to panic. Sustained panic is not okay. Okay, we know it does terrible things to the brain. And it's horrible for the dog.
Yep.
But I don't move away from stress. I try to teach the dog the concept of pushing through stress, pushing through pressure, pushing through things that are uncomfortable. And that does involve putting the puppy in uncomfortable situations. Pushing puppy through uncomfortable situations and continuing to push them through. But I don't mind that, and especially with the Mallee puppies, they are built usually very strong. They are very resilient, but those genes themselves need to be expressed. They don't just be expressed by themselves, and therefore they have, those genes have to be expressed. So the dogs have to give them lots of practice of recovering from stress and putting them in those stressful situations. So like I say, like I took her to the cinema when she was like, I hand-reared her, so she was like 5 weeks old or something, and I used to take her to like the kids' parties and stuff, and they're things that I probably wouldn't have taken Ella to. That I took Fiasco to, because with Ella I would have been more like, oh, that's going to properly stress her out, like that's going to be a lot for a puppy like her, and I'd move up that slowly. Or if I did take her into those, I'd take her with a chew and make sure she was okay. With Fiasco, I'm going, this is fine, mate, this is fine, and she's going, this is a bit stressful, and I'm like, no, it's not. Push for it, because I think the last thing you want is a glass Malinois.
Yeah.
The last.
Yeah.
You see them all the time, and the last thing, like, they are the dog that you least want being glassy, being fragile.
Yeah.
So they've got enough in them to not be like that, but you need to push through it rather than going, oh, they're a bit stressed, I'm going to remove them, or I'm going to give them space. I think they're not that type of dog. Not all of them, but mostly they're the type of dog where you say, no, keep going.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. And then the last question to me, we always end with this question, and it's my absolute favorite. So if you had to recommend 3 things to make a dog happy, what would that be? So anything.
Love, definitely. Loads of love. Dogs need love. Dogs are domesticated. They're the most domesticated species. They're ludicrously domesticated. Like, it's in the fibre of who they're being, is being close to people. They need love. Give them love. Make sure you spend time and you put aside time to put your phone down, don't scroll on TikTok, and instead go, I'm going to give this dog true engagement. I'm going to look with my eyes, she's asleep so she can't see, but I'm going to look with my eyes into her eyes, and I'm going to spend this time touching her in a way that she wants to be touched, and I'm going to give her love, because relationship is important in every aspect of dog ownership, and that comes through allow time for love, right? Number one. Number two, adventure. All dogs need adventure to be happy. Love and adventure, I think, are the two main things that any dog needs in their life. An adventure involves going to new places, seeing novel things, meeting new people. It involves doing stuff together where you go on adventures. You adventure out into the world together. So all dogs need love and adventure. So those two things are, like, for me, that I always think about that, and I always think I always think the most important thing that I can give these guys, as important as food and shelter, is making sure that every week they all have an opportunity for, like, real love and adventure every day if I can, but every week. And then the last one, which is a lot more boring, is biological fulfillment. Biologically speaking, genetically speaking, who is that dog? What are their biological itches? And you can see that normally by the behavior that they present. Like, are they digging in the garden? And it's normally the unwanted behavior that teaches you the biological itches that aren't being scratched. Like, what are they doing? How can I give them an appropriate ability to do that? So I used to let Archie, like, dissect the delivery boxes. So I say to him, you rip them up, mate, like, smash them up. I don't can rip them to shreds and make a big mess. You're not normally allowed to do that type of stuff, but with these boxes, in this context, in the garden, you're allowed to do that. Like, rip them to shreds, because that's giving him a way of, he had quite a high drive for dissect, and that was giving him the ability to dissect something and really enjoy doing it. So for me, biological itches being scratched, looking at the dog biologically, and then love and adventure.
Yeah, those are three definitely good things. Thank you so much for coming on our podcast. We've absolutely loved chatting to you. It's been really, really interesting. Where can people find out more about you?
Your best bet is my Instagram, which is Jo-Rosie H. And then everything else is linked off that. So, like, my Facebook and my website and my email list and all that type of stuff is linked directly off my Instagram these days.
Okay.
Which is very fashionable of me, but
cool. Well, we'll put your link in the show notes as well. So yeah, thank you so much again. We really, really appreciate it.
Okay.